All
Oh man, I
right. Love the
feel like
music
it's
intro,
actually
right?
dancing. Yeah,
Yeah.
like that was great.
If we could do class like that and do actual like industrial control system cyber defense like that, it'd be awesome. But
I don't know if
af-
people can handle like the ICS shuffle. Like if I shuffle in the class like that, it'd probably be too much.
after the ICS stuff, we can kick into more additional music. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Today, we are going to be going over the new course, which is ICS 418. This is ICS Security Essentials for Managers. We're going to get started in just a quick minute. I'm going to pass it over to Jason. We're going to do quick intros. We're going to be looking for your comments as well in the live feed as we go. So any questions you have through anything we do today, drop them in there in the comments. We'll get to those questions as well. So I'll pass it over to Jason.
Yeah, just welcoming people back. So we sort of talked about this for those of you who were at GridSecCon this week. We did sort of a sneak peek, which is really awesome. So we were able to give people a little bit of a primer on what we were going to accomplish, and then just sort of building into it. So I think that it's actually a really good threat there, Dean, that if there aren't any comments, I think you and I could just talk forever. But please provide comments, provide questions. Really want to make sure this is an active sort of live stream that we're able to do for the community.
I think class is going to be similar. We're going to cover all the content, of course, in the class as well, but really kind of speak to our experiences, what we had seen the last 10, 20 years in ICS, and really kind of bringing that to the managers and folks in the class as well. So with that, I'm going to pivot over into the slide deck. That's going to kind of guide us through, going to give everybody an overview of what the course is really about, touch on the 2-day course and the topics in there as well. We're going to first start off with a very quick introduction. So myself, I'm Dean Parsons, certified SANS instructor, currently teaching ICS 515 and 418 coming up next. And my experiences is really started off hacking Linux way back in the day in high school, spent 10 years in the IT space. So really doing a lot of technical work in IT from the telecommunications sector. And then the last half of my career so far really switched over looking at the industrial control system. So started out with building teams as an example, policies, procedures, but never got away from the technical aspects. And the last 10 years really focusing in the electric sector, in the generation, transmission, distribution, and more recently in oil and gas as well. So I think that what we're going to cover today, and Jason's going to be there with me on that, is we're going to cover things in class. We're going to give those students things that we wish we had when we were kind of coming up through the ranks, and then ultimately managing cybersecurity programs for industrial control systems. So that's a bit about myself. I'll hand it back over to Jason for an intro for him.
Thank you, Dean. And already seeing people asking questions about what's been covered in the course. We will totally talk about culture because that is going to be a big part of what it is that we're trying to accomplish, especially in ICS security. So we'll talk about those differences in a moment. But for my background, so sort of on the side of where did I come up from? I came up from doing ICS, actually designing SCADA systems, implementing the communication systems that were sort of the linchpins for SCADA. And then one day I foolishly asked the question, hey, who takes care of the cybersecurity with the SCADA system that we're developing? I didn't know enough at the time, but the sort of my bosses were like, don't worry about it. We're putting in the GPRS modems from AT&T. They totally have it covered. And we'll put in any telecom provider there that you would like. You know that that's not the case, right? You own the risk. You're managing the system. You own that cyber risk yourself. And so it took me a while to understand that and sort of get onto the security side of the equation. And from that, my culture sort of conversations really were pushing upwards. I ended up becoming a federal regulator on cybersecurity. That was a total unknown to me as a career life progression. I then became the National Incident Response Commander for incident response at the U.S. Department of Energy, as well as risk management there, before becoming an independent security researcher and an executive at a company where I had to make some of these calls that we're talking about throughout ICS 418. What it is that you do to build the team? How do you have them sort of tackle these issues that we're all going to be facing when we discuss ICS security? And really, what I view as one of the largest problems we're going to have in our generation is how do we protect critical infrastructure? I also teach at SANS another course, ICS 456, which is 5 action-packed days of regulatory compliance for cybersecurity. Yes, action-packed. I will stand by that, Dean. As you know, that class has got 25 hands-on labs. We do technical concepts on top of compliance. So a lot of that DNA of how do you do governance and how do you do oversight and execution and support, spoiler alert, are things we're going to talk about that's baked into a 2-day course that we're doing here in 418.
Excellent. And hopefully we won't scare anybody away. In fact, we have labs in this course as well, but they're management level labs. So tools we'll use at a management level as well. But we're going to get into it. So we'll pivot through the slides and really give you an understanding of really the ICS curriculum overall, where it started, where this course fits into that, and why it's important to do ICS 418, ICS Essentials for Managers, for Security for Managers, now at this time. So well, a long time ago, way back, and galaxy far away, we're seeing, the birth of 410, ICS 410. And that's the kind of entry level course in the ICS curriculum, where it's really kind of focusing on the engineering kind of folks connecting together. And then, of course, we have the IT and OT convergence in that course. And then this is the course that Jason teaches with all of those labs on compliance, which are technical for ICS 456, specifically for NERC compliance. We see electric generation transmission distribution facilities using that, obviously, in the NERC SIP area, but also others outside of the electric organizations also using it. And then stepping up, we have ICS 515. This is a more technical course as well, which is ICS visibility, detection, and response, which just had a huge overhaul, a large update, and really focuses on visibility inside the ICS network specifically, and then pivoting to threat detection. And then when you find threats, you're pivoting to incident response, specifically for the industrial environment. The last one on this slide is ICS 612, which is a more advanced course, kind of the ICS security lab on wheels, right, that travels globally with tons and tons of kits and practical PLC chassis that, students get to hack, defend, and kind of rebuild throughout the class as well. So where does all this fit in the abbreviated timeline that is the SANS ICS curriculum, right? So way back in 2005 we had a growing community.
We had just us, right? Like it's just like like a cadre of people taking SANS courses. It wasn't even like this organized thing we were doing.
Yeah, totally, right. And so we did have that way back, and we knew that there was a growing community required, right, Jason? And we knew that there was a growing risk as well. And that pivoted SANS to do the 410 release in 2014. And then, of course, we had to kind of put additional content out there for practitioners, really focusing on the ICS 515 released in 2015, right, with practical PLC kits on the actual student desktop on tables when they're doing the labs, or at home as well. And I can let you take it from here, because this is 2016 when ICS 456 was released here. So go for it, man.
So I'm not going to spoil it or anything, but this was definitely the first course that people wanted to see out of the ICS curriculum. I jest, but with the electric sector, we had this what do we do about NERC SIP? We were the only sector that had to deal with these mandatory regulations that had $1 million penalties per day per violation, really scary boogeyman type of things. But how do we actually implement this? And with 1,500 utilities in North America that had to do something with it, really the idea was, well, how can we sort of cut through the mud and sort of the unknowns of NERC SIP, and also make it a technical class instead of just death by PowerPoint, and invest in these labs and be able to have sort of that feedback. So, after the detour that became 410, which has got thousands of people who have gone through, became GICSP certified, 515 taught by Rob Lee, we're finally able to then create 456. And really working across the team to be able to see how that course has matured over the years, I've certainly loved. I've been teaching that now for about 4 years after Tim and Ted convinced me that I should go on and pay my dues for being the regulator who got us into some of this mess and really work out some of the solutions in that course. And then 612 is such an exciting course. Whenever, back with in-person teaches, I would always just sort of sneak out of my own class during breaks. Like, hey, everybody do your labs, and then like walk over to 612, where you saw people like really working on a control system. It goes sort of against the normal mode of, hey, here's your student USB, here's some of the things that you're going to do that are really cool and awesome. Here's physical equipment, and like we want you to do stuff for the physical equipment. I thought that was just amazing. So obviously that's still only in person, because there's not really a way to ship all that physical equipment to make your own physical ICS security lab in your house. So really looking forward to be able to see that now come back around to be offered in person as well. But I think that the timeline here is really amazing, right? Because we had this sort of 15-year period of growth where we started off with just a bunch of us getting together, literally at night, doing like, ICS security skits and plays with some beers in hand, and then building out into what became this world-class curriculum that we're now involved in.
Absolutely. And so really in 2017, this is where our story fits in today, was kind of the testing the waters of ICS 418 for leadership. Like, is there a need for this? Is there a want for this? And is there a place that there's an ICS course for managers, right? And so back in the day, I'll call it Mike Asante, right? The late, great Mike Asante contributed so much to ICS and critical infrastructure, right? And I really see this, and we see this as kind of taking the helm. So he put this seminar together in 2017, and he ran the seminar and said, yeah, you know what, there is a need for this. And really, it's something that it's really going to be targeting management and executives as well. And why are we doing this? Because there's practitioners out there already. And the idea is we need to make sure that those folks without experience to tell the story from an ICS security perspective in a way that's going to kind of leverage the safety aspect and kind of fortify our critical infrastructure. So this gap in the prioritization for ICS security was birthed out of that whole seminar, and the idea kind of lingers today and is now codified into ICS 418. And so,
say,
yeah,
that's actually that's the I was there, but I was there because I just wanted to spend like 4 hours with Mike, right? Like if Mike Asante was going to talk about leadership for 4 hours, like I'm totally there, right? Just you can hype me up with coffee, and like I don't even need the caffeine at that point. But really at that point, I didn't know that 418 was going to be something that we would percolate to. It seemed like a really nice to have. We're doing the SANS ICS Summit, which for those of you who've not gone to Summit, even the virtual ones we've been doing, I think the last virtual we had was like 8,000 registrants. When there's a few hundred of us sort of going through this and being able to talk and see these sort of pre-course materials, no clue that that a 2-day course was something that was on the horizon. But obviously, with the life circumstances being what they became, that I would be one of the co-authors to be able to help out with this. So it really did sort of that timeline that you showed, sort of the sneak peek in 2017 that we didn't know was going to be the domino effect that we're going to see in ICS 418.
And this ultimately led to putting in obviously the Mike Asante principle, and I have to read this aloud. So the only defense against the well-funded nation-state attacks on power systems and the rest of critical infrastructure that keeps us and the economy alive and free are the people with the extraordinary cyber talent and skills. And that's what we're going to be really focusing on, in addition to other aspects of this course, is the cyber talent. You coming into a management role or stepping up or stepping over into an ICS management role with the responsibility of a protection of critical infrastructure, leading the charge with those cyber talented folks and the skills, and kind of building that in along the way as well. And so before I pass it back to Jason, I'll go through a couple slides and just talk about the timing a little bit for today. And so really for the course and kind of why now, right? If we look at this from a kind of community perspective, what the gaps are, we're really seeing that there's a workforce out there that's definitely growing, and it's technical in nature, and that's excellent, and that's what we want. However, we need to make sure that those folks they have leaders from the ICS kind of security background and engineering kind of background as well, right? Similar with governance, right? We're now seeing the ICS risk and the risk registry in an organization talked about and looked at regularly at the boardroom level, right? And if you go below that, you see the projects are now increasing because we have additional increased IP connectivity, additional devices, smart systems, all kind of contributing to critical infrastructure. And so the idea with projects is to make sure that someone sitting at the table from an ICS engineering security background, making sure that projects have security in mind for the ICS kind of area. Now, we're going to get into it in the course as well. Not going to spoil too much here, but of course, there's a difference in OT and IT in general as a technology, but also the approach for security as well. And I mean, Jason and I both know, we've both seen IT controls pasted into the ICS and breaking things. And so we don't want that to happen. It's a great way for a team never to come back into facilities. So we want to promote the appropriate use of security controls into the ICS. And we did see some comments earlier about culture as well, right? How do we use and leverage the culture that's there, the physical safety culture we're all aware of in OT environments, right? And how do we use that to kind of propel the ICS security kind of program forward? Realizing, of course, that safety is number one, and security in ICS supports that mission of safety, right?
Actually, just really quick on that last slide, I'd be curious from the folks who are on the live stream right now, what of these drivers is really the thing that they're sort of concerned with when it comes to ICS security for managers. Like we've sort of seen now, and I'd say it's really been the past couple of years in particular. So actually, again, Mike having been the visionary that he was to offer that seminar really at the crux when I don't know, we were worried a lot about educating the workforce, right? Educating the practitioners, but the sort of peripheral of the managers need to be trained too someday, right? Like we got to that point where the workforce we've got thousands that are now certified within the ICS SANS curriculum alone. Not talking about worldwide, the others who haven't sort of gone through a certification process that we're aware of. So we're now at the point where the managers are going to have to be educated so they can deal with their educated workforce. So I'm just sort of curious from folks if it's the workforce concerns, right? The growing skilled laborers that we're starting to see, and whether or not the managers need some help with that. If it's really from the top down, right? The governance coming in, if that's one of the drivers that you all are seeing when it comes to why you'd want to have a trained manager set, or the complexity around projects, or hey, we had this IT manager come into our OT environment. They started throwing like endpoint solutions on everything they could. They wanted to encrypt all of our data, even though it didn't make any sense. We really need them trained up on OT security in particular. Or is it that culture piece? And so I'd love to be able to see if there are any comments or questions from the audience, if any of these one in particular drivers, or maybe it's a smattering of all the above, is one of the things that they'd be interested in sort of exploring a little bit more. We can go on as people collect their thoughts on that, but I'd just be really curious from sort of the audience on this one.
Yeah, I'm hoping to see some comments there as well, Jason. Great points. And you made a good point about this course and why it's unique as well, and why we're going to take the approach that we do that kind of sets this course apart from a generic kind of management course for IT security. That's where we're going to talk about the differences in control, the differences in culture and things like that. So, I mean, I'll pop it back over to you. Let's run through what you think are the what, where, when, how, and why with this course and the content.
And so again, sort of when we try to tackle this conversation, why now? I think that the layup of those external drivers is really interesting. But then when we think about ICS security managers themselves, they are a different breed. They have to be. They're sort of forced into this very difficult position where it's managing both the things that have to happen on the implementation level, the things that are expected from maybe a board, maybe executives, maybe an executive like somewhere over there, right? Like somebody not even in their normal chain of command, as it were. And so we wanted to sort of explore the what, the why, the where, the how, and the when for a lot of the ICS management concerns that we have. The what obviously being trying to tackle the technology differences. What's the difference between IT and OT, translating those differences, because even if an executive or board is pushing things from a governance perspective on cyber risk, they may be talking about it from what they know and what they've heard from IT security for the past maybe 5 to 15 years. And they're spending a lot of money on things like SharePoint, which is not that you don't need to spend money on securing your SharePoint or your website, you do. But if you're spending more money on securing the website than you are on the actual production that makes the money for the company, or the like providing a service to citizens, there's probably a mismatch, and you probably need to overcome that. So understanding that and establishing that is one of the things that we want to be able to do in this course. The why, be able to present that security challenge, and mean that we need to influence that culture, which again, a lot of comments on the culture, which I'm loving so much because we're baking that in so much. And then the where is really interesting, because when you want to say, well, I want to talk to your ICS security manager, who is that? Where do they sit in the organization? They could be anywhere. They don't even necessarily have the role of manager. They may be a sysadmin with 60 some odd direct reports that they need to then be identified as a leader. And maybe they're not empowered at that same level as you would expect to see from an information security officer. And then the what, we're obviously going to cover standards. We can't, like, it's one thing to go in and be like, hey, I took this great SANS course, I got all these best practices. But if you can't tie it back to an actual standard, when you try to make those changes, things will be a little bit difficult. And the when, as we joke, is often too late. So you can see here for the what, we're obviously going to talk about the differences between IT and OT systems. So this is a slide directly from the course material. We're going to talk about those differences in a little bit more in depth, but at that managerial level, right? So we're not going to necessarily provide them the hands-on fingers keyboards of like, hey, you're going to start programming some ladder logic. But they need to understand that the protections they typically would see in an IT environment aren't going to be there in OT. And if they come from OT, they need to understand that there are protections we can put in place, because maybe they've only been thinking about that device in terms of safety and reliability and not the security protections. For the next one, when we start talking about sort of the overall, sorry, Dean, next slide. There we go. The overall whys. We know this, right? A lot of the folks who are already on this sort of channel, I can see some of the expertise that we're discussing. We already know that we've sort of seen this industrial revolution over time get to more connectivity. And so obviously that more connectivity means things for the business. It means optimization in a lot of cases. But for us from a security perspective, it means access, and maybe the attacker has a perspective as well. And then where are they? I love this, Dean. And I know that you spent a lot of time discussing this, and maybe share a little bit more thoughts on this one too, but we've seen them come from all over, right? I've seen sort of folks say, well, my OT security leader reports, like the one smack dab in the middle that always hits me is finance. And people are like, how does that work? Like the finance person doesn't know security. They don't, but I guarantee you they know risk, and they know what it takes to keep the business operational. And so you may see that person has got the keys to the coffers of being able to get some more budgetary things than they could if they were under the VP of engineering. But
Absolutely.
I know you've seen 1,000 of these as well, where it's like,
Yeah.
where do you sit?
Yeah, I mean, I've sat in different positions that you're seeing on the screen here, for example, and to the point about the VP of Finance understanding it, that can work. I've seen it fail miserably as well, but it can work. And the crux of it is this: no matter where they're sitting on this slide here, as long as they put forth things like safety and reliability above everything else for the company, that is where you need to go. And that's what's going to make a leader in OT security and maintain the safety and reliability of operations. I have seen situations where there is no focus on that, where there's kind of a split brain, if you will. There's a manager that manages IT and also OT, and they report up through an IT chain. And so the problem with that split brain is an issue happens on the IT side. At the same time, there's something on the ICS side. Which do they prioritize, right? So I did see a lot of conflict in that particular case. So suffice it to say, you can sit anywhere in this kind of structure that we have, as long as there's a prioritization on what makes people safe and the production of the facilities run, which is really the ICS side. If we kind of pivot beyond that, I mean, there's the how as well, right? I mean, Jason, what do you think? You talked about standards earlier before, guidelines, regulations. We got to have that in the course. Of course, we align to that as well. And then, of course, there's the when, right? And I mean, what's your thoughts on the when here, and also the who coming up, Jason?
Yeah, so this actually is a direct slide from one of the originals that Mike Asante had put together during that seminar. It's so timely to still actually talk about this, and it's interesting, right? Because so this direct slide is talking about the explosion of industrial wireless, and this is in 2017. And sure, we were definitely seeing that at the time, but it's only gotten more sort of prevalent, right? And now we have to talk about things like the cloud. And so some of the when that we're going to talk about is a lot of OT security we find is sort of this reactive state, right? You may knee jerk to a new procurement that the VP of engineering wants to be able to assign out into the field or on a facility. Well, what if you could, instead of just being reactive, also be proactive? And so this is actually going to feed into one of the labs in ICS 418, which is a discussion of, well, how do you go through and do technology trending? How do you forecast what technologies your firm may be interested in, and not just security, but actually like the business, because we're putting a security wrapper around the business. So being able to identify what are those technology trends, and then therefore what are the different potentials we have if it goes unmitigated, if we don't really sort of tackle it with security in mind, or if we do, and what does that look like? Because we obviously can't keep saying no, right? We've done that before. We said no TCP/IP anywhere, not in my substation. And obviously that worked, and therefore there have been no TCP/IP connections in any substation across any place else in the world.
Yeah, and the technology trends you mentioned as well, like for sure there's different technologies to be deployed in the ICS as well, right? So again, bringing it up because it's super important, not just lifting what you have in IT and putting it in ICS as well, right?
And then the who is maybe not everybody who's the you on this call. The who is going to be the people who are taking this class. So I'm not sure, based off of the different titles that I see sort of getting me on the comment side, there are probably a lot of you that would be interested in this course, but there's also probably managers that you'd be interested in having them take this course. And this is a great tee up to what type of managers are we trying to target. So maybe Dean, if you want to sort of walk through what's our ideas on the different backgrounds of managers, because that's going to influence every single time we run this class. I mean, who's in the room is going to influence the stories and some of the things that we're going to be able to call upon throughout that.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because the room will change every time we teach this. We're going to have connections being made, like people connections, right? People are going to connect and kind of share information. We're going to see managers kind of saying, well, here's what I've done. What have you done? In addition to the class and our experiences and our stories as well, right? So the course for 418 is really kind of catering to the managers who are asked to kind of step over, right? This is the typical IT security manager who's now standing up an ICS security program. Now, never before, but now has responsibility for ICS OT environments, and going to learn a lot about that environment, right? And kind of bring a lot of great knowledge from the IT security side of the house, and then learn how to adapt and kind of change some of those technologies and approaches to cater it to the ICS. So that's the step over, if you will, from IT kind of realms. And of course, we have the practitioner to manager as well, which are those folks which are inside the ICS to some degree. Maybe they're an engineer, maybe they're ICS architect or an operator, as an example, and then stepping up inside of the ICS area to that management level. And then, of course, you have the in-place existing managers that kind of really have the ICS kind of security background practitioners reporting to them, and then they're really charged with leading that group for practical, I'll say, risk management in the ICS. If we take a look a little further at step over, and we'll get to step up in a few minutes as well, we're really seeing that kind of fluent IT-centric controls that someone's going to bring over from IT, and then learn how to adapt and adjust those as they kind of move forward, right? So Jason, jump in anytime. But we really see as well the step up. And this is where we have great experience in the industrial control sector. And we see a lot of folks coming from IT really looking to learn more about that in engineering side, the operations, not necessarily from programming the PLC in the field and setting up SCADA set points and things like that, but having a good, solid understanding of what the process is, how it can be impacted, how it actually functions, at least at a high level. And that's where we see these step up managers kind of gaining that, giving that experience over to some of the IT folks that are coming on board as well. And of course, then you have that in place, right? Already the boss, already kind of like the leader, if you will, in the ICS area, and really taking the lead charge, measuring ICS security, taking the technology trends and kind of adapting it, as we talked about, in towards the ICS. And I think Jason loves this slide, right? And it's really all about that the middleware that the managers could sit in this class. I'll pass it back to Jason if he has any questions.
And actually, thank you for. So I saw a comment that my mic was a little bit low, so I stood closer. I'm going to project more, and hopefully I'll take care of any noise issues for folks. But I think the good thing to note about sort of those previous few slides about the background of the manager is we all have biases, right? No matter who we are. And you're going to have a bias as a manager based off of your experience and based off of where you came from. So whether it be that you're coming over from IT, in that case, you've been identified already as a leader and a manager, likely somewhere, which means that you probably already have that management experience. You probably led large teams. You understand how to put different governance controls in place. But if you're coming up as a practitioner, where the number one thing that you had to worry about was really how to secure these systems, and now you have to worry about how to grow a team, how to retain and hire folks, that's going to be very different, right? The joke that we've been using is that turns out people have feelings, not just the sort of technology that you may be used to. And so understanding those two in particular, that they're going to have a very different background, and we want to be able to adapt to what that looks like. It's going to be sort of the water level raises all ships. And we're going to make sure that folks come out of the class with both a conversation on the technology on the OT side and how to secure it, as well as how to manage the people. And this gets to the managers as a middleware. So you can see that they are in this chain where they have to do all this work and speak the language above them as well as the language below them in terms of practitioners versus the executives. And all of them are really skilled, really smart at what they do, but the manager is sort of the bridge between those two different worlds. And when you look at that, the big question is, how do you make sure that they don't become the weakest link? And making sure that we can sort of, again, raise their skill set across all of these different things that they need is going to be part of that course into ICS 418. So with that, Dean, why don't we talk about the actual day of event? Like what does this course look like for folks who've been already asking questions? What is it we're going to try to teach them over the next couple of days during ICS 418 itself?
Absolutely. And you made a point there about kind of the skill sets those folks are going to have in the environment, kind of helping them learn. One of the things I've always found really helpful is, people on the team, new to the team, and they're coming from IT as an example, the first thing I do is we get to site. They have to do the safety training, all that stuff usually that needs to be done, and we get them to site to really kind of understand a little bit more about the environment that they're going to be protecting, right? So the physical getting to site, there's nothing beats it, right? So when it comes to the 2 days of the course, we're kind of going to run through what we have set out for each day. And so the first day is really kind of focusing on the ICS management core development and responsibilities, right? So really focusing on exploring the knowledge of what makes the ICS security unique. And this is what this course tailors to, really kind of opening up the ICS security uniqueness and kind of speaking to that. Perfect for the IT manager stepping over to OT as an example, OT leaders due to security, and kind of blending that knowledge, kind of experiences and knowledge portions together, really to understand the ICS, the mission for critical infrastructure, prioritizing safety, and then kind of pivoting from there. So we'll cover things like obviously the most recent attacks, which will be updated on a regular basis. We'll cover the trends, as Jason mentioned earlier, the main topics, the IT, OT differences, obviously the incident response. As a manager, you now have technical folks reporting to you that hopefully will be able to have the technology and tools and skills to do incident response. Again, prioritizing a lot of the ICS environments, which is not the same as there's an IT system, it's been compromised in the IT network, pull the cord. Like, it's a different approach. So we're going to dive into those differences and give you the best practices from that as well. And of course, we'll end off on day one with the ICS kind of policies, frameworks that Jason mentioned earlier, which is kind of the crux of how to guide you and your team, leading them to that better place with your program for ICS. You want to go through day two because, hey, man, it's a 2-day thing and there's two of us. You can go through day two.
I think that the interesting thing about the end of day one is as managers, especially if they're new to a lot of those topics, they're going to walk away with that's a lot of responsibilities. I don't know if I knew that was that many responsibilities, because again, if you've been doing this for a long time, you may be in this reactive mode where there aren't that many plans that you're able to put in place. Instead, it's a lot of reaction. And so day one is really set to identify for the manager, hey, here are the things that you need to be able to do. What day two sort of sets up is you're not doing it alone. It's not just on you. Now, you do have to juggle a lot of things in your brain. You have to be able to write a lot of things down to be able to plan for this. And so that's why we start off with strategic planning, to be able to help out with this conversation of what should our teams look like. Well, in order to do that, we need to be able to plan for that. And then we mentioned sort of this idea of governance, oversight, execution, and support, something that comes out of safety culture, actually. Really popular within electric sector and nuclear sector, to be able to set up roles and responsibilities based off of what you need to do for safety. Well, we can now turn that on the head and be able to say, well, what do you need to do for security? And we can use the models that have already been really successful in safety culture, which is by far, for most industrial sites, the culture that wins out at the end of the day. So why not use the tools that have already been leveraged there and adapt them to ICS security? And that's what we start off with, to be able to then identify for you what you want to do for your ICS security program. That helps you with being able to measure value. That's going to get to things like KPIs, key performance indicators. And that also then builds into, well, what are the roles and responsibilities across your team before you start talking about building and maturing that team, and then actually measuring what your program's doing, including changing some of that culture when we talk about awareness. And of course, executives matter too. They are obviously asking for a lot of different measurements. And we don't want to be putting people in the sort of really bad process of, oh, we had 50,000 attacks on the firewall per day. It means nothing, especially not for our ICS program. I mean, I guess if you're seeing 50,000 attacks, we really need to identify what you mean by attack. But we're going to go through and not only define those things, but also give you metrics that work, and really tell you about how you need to grow a team to be able to measure. So you can start trending data that shows, like, what's our cyber risk? Yellow. What if I give you $200 million? What'll it be next year? Yellow, right? Like those metrics don't matter, but we'll tell you about the ones that do, so you can start, again, trending and tracking towards things that can help you mature over time.
So excellent timing. We got a question really about maybe metrics, but also separation of IT and ICS assets, ICS versus IT environment. How do you separate that out? And we'll talk about those best practices as well. And so if you do have 50,000 hits on your ICS firewall, then that's probably a problem. Do you have direct connectivity? All those kinds of things will kind of be discussed. In general, to answer your question, it's really all about segmentation. And it's really treating IT and the internet as hostile environments. And so we'll get into those discussions for sure throughout the class, and really good questions here as we go through. The objectives are really kind of the overview of critical infrastructure. So if you don't know what an ICS is and you're coming to the class, we're going to educate you on that. We'll have those discussion, talk about the measurements and kind of managing that the threat landscape as well. And of course, we'll talk about the GOES, which is governance, oversight, and execution, and the support. That's all on day one. Now, day two even gets more interesting. Now, there's labs throughout, but day two is really going to be focusing on that culture that we see so much about in the comments. So we know that's something critical that we're all going to be kind of experiencing and leveraging. So that's a core part of day two. That workforce development as well. So building your team or inheriting a team and then kind of changing and improving your team over time, retaining them being the best thing as well, right? And then managing the day-to-day operations, and then back to your management role of reporting to the executive about your annual planning. You're reporting about your metrics and the program. So common themes are going to come up. Culture is obviously one of them. So we've talked about security and safety being very similar or the same. Security really supporting safety of operations, and of course the IT versus OT technology convergence, which has been done for 20 years. We've converged technologies 20 years ago. We have traditional operating systems in the OT environment that look like IT, but they're OT assets. Below those assets, right, is the engineering gear, the bits that push and change things in the physical world. Of course, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. So it's really going to be leveraging what security folks have been doing for decades and then adapting it into the ICS. And I can tell you that ICS is definitely a place where you can excel at defense because it is more static than an IT. So, I mean, you'll probably laugh, but if someone were to tell me 20 years ago that I'd be doing cybersecurity with a hard hat in a plant someplace or an electric facility or oil and gas or a cookie factory, I'd be laughing at them, but that's really what we're doing today, protecting our critical infrastructure. And again, we see that common theme of culture coming up as well, right? So before we jump into the lab kind of component and the leadership drills we're going to kind of dive into, Jason, do you have any thoughts on these kind of common themes? I know there's a lot of folks out there going to want to discuss this. And again, if you guys have questions, drop those into the comment section there.
I think just in general, noting that we're going to tackle this in every single module, every single day.
Yeah.
Right? And that's one of the common themes. Because we can't sort of drop the ball on any one of these while sort of teaching it. It's really going to be about, again, changing that culture. That's why I like the culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? It doesn't matter how many times you talk about practices, policies, and procedures, but if you don't have the culture that sort of supports that, then almost none of this matters. And all of this really then ties back into those points. So I'm just looking forward to being able to help students sort of reinforce these mantras as we're able to go through it and build their teams to understand that too.
And reinforcing these common themes, the best practices throughout is really the hands-on labs, right? So there's actually a virtual environment that we have for managers. Don't worry, you're not going to be hacking Linux or anything like that. The objective, though, is to use the tools we have, management level tools inside that VM. That's going to help us do things like standards assessments, going to do things like evaluating your security risk for ICS. And really kind of understand, and it also has additional material in there we're going to put in there as well, which literally there's so much material in this course. And yes, if you think this is a traditional SANS course where it's like drinking from the fire hose, oh yeah, big time. So the hands-on labs is really going to reinforce that content. But in addition, we'll have in-class discussions, right? Leadership drills, really kind of to individualize your experience in the class. So when you leave the class, you're flying back home or whatever the case is, or you disconnect and reconnect to your system at work from home, you can apply what we've just talked about for 2 days to your specific environment. So that's really those leadership drills on top of those labs as well, right? And so if you do think we're going to talk about how things have changed over time, of course we will. We'll talk about why the risk is higher now, which the connectivity is higher and needed from a business perspective, right? So we'll talk about a little bit about history, but don't worry, we're not going to put you to sleep. It's really going to be the actions that are coming out of the low, medium to high risk changes we've seen that pushes us forward again into the labs and those common themes, reinforcing those common themes.
About real world ICS attacks. If somebody falls asleep during that,
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I like you may be able to then fall asleep during, the Poltergeist or some other scary movie during Halloween time.
Yeah, and so we'll talk about the big five, right, Jason? Like we'll
Yep.
talk about Trisis, that target safety instrumented system, which has the only real idea behind creating that malware is to kill people or to take systems offline and damage them potentially, right? So we'll talk about all that stuff as well. Don't worry, you're not going to fall asleep at all. And again, I mean, you can jump on this one, but I love this slide. I mean, there's no color to this slide, but it's so awesome because there's a huge difference in cyber defense for IT and ICS. In ICS, there's fewer users. Well, you should have fewer users and fewer users going to YouTube and Facebook and other kind of IT related or non-security related kind of systems and sites. So in the ICS, I will say it's probably one of the most defensible networks on the planet because of that. And it's also a little bit more static as well, right? Things change a little less, which means finding that needle in the haystack is a lot easier from a detection perspective. Another great thing about ICS defense and kind of leading the charge there with your team is really focusing on the dwell time for the adversaries. It takes usually a lot longer for an adversary to kind of have an impact in ICS. What that means for us as managers and teams from a technical perspective, leading those teams as well, is that's opportunity for you and your team to do detection well ahead of events happening that can take some of the systems down, right? So a lot of huge differences there. And again, pointed out throughout the course, reinforced with those the slides and obviously the leadership drills as well.
And I think that folks understanding that they have a home field advantage.
Yeah.
It feels like there's a stack it because when we talk about ICS attacks, we're not talking about script kiddies getting into our industrial control systems. Where the major fears and major risks that we're now tracking are all the different sort of nation state adversaries that are able to build capabilities to target critical infrastructure. That's terrifying for a lot of folks. But what they need to understand is exactly what you said is sort of this home field advantage discussion that your systems better than anybody else. And it takes the adversary time to understand what protocols are you running? What is the engineering process? What do they do to recover from a maintenance event? Because that'll look very similar how they recover from a security event. And be able to figure that out and then sort of base their operations off of that means that you've got that advantage to be able to continually look for them, hunt for them, and build sort of the programmatic needs that you have at your disposal that we'll cover during this course to target that and be able to take care of the dirty business of securing your infrastructure.
And the differences as well, again, pointing out from IT, it's the triad, the traditional that really works, triad CIA. Whereas when you start focusing on the ICS realm, things like confidentiality takes a back seat. Why? Because we're not as worried about sensitive data inside the ICS as much. Of course, we don't want our configurations, our logic, our data historian information about how we run the process to get out. But really it's safety, right? So it's availability, integrity, confidentiality, and also moving beyond that to mature to really focusing on integrity. If your operators and your engineers and your security folks issue a command or do something in the environment, they want to make sure that that has integrity behind it. The result from a cyber click button here to a physical change in the real world, they want to make sure that that's an authorized change, right? And so integrity, availability, and confidentiality is really where we're trying to push a lot of the organizations in the ICS realm. And why are we doing this, right? And it's because of things like the high impact, low frequency events, right? And so these HILF kind of events, they're really kind of, we've seen a renewed focus on these events. The risks that have catastrophic impacts on critical infrastructure, safety, the environment, that may never occur or they occur rarely or haven't happened yet. And that's the whole point. But what we're seeing in the last couple of years, we've mapped events that have been critical to impacts in the industrial environment. Now, the lower left, we see things like the most recent Oldsmar water facility compromise where someone tried to or change the system to essentially that could poison people in a water system that was caught by an operator that kind of fixed that, which is great. But we also have things like the Colonial Pipeline attack event, a huge event in 2021 that's further driving things like considerations for specific ICS security programs. And then up in stage 2, we'll call it the impactful attacks, specifically to the control systems itself, are things like the Ukraine attack in 2015 and 2016, scalable malware in 2016 that we're seeing targeted in the industrial control space. So this is not your kind of commodity off-the-shelf malware used to kick in the doors and kind of grab data. This is tailored malware that has an impact in the industrial control sector, specifically designed for that. Of course, the S word comes up, which is Stuxnet at the top right. And of course, then we have Trisis, the first piece of ICS malware focusing on safety, right? So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that we're dealing with. However, these are not the only things, right? And I love it, Jason, when we get into that conversation when it's like, well, there's a top 5 or 6 types of ICS targeted attacks. IT-related or commodity IT malware can also have an impact into the industrial environment as well. So as a leader from this course and in an ICS, you need to have considerations for detecting IT kind of related stuff as well as these advanced persistent threat capabilities and campaigns as well, right? So again, lofty kind of thing, right, to kind of lead the charge, but absolutely worth it when we're talking our critical infrastructure, which is actively being attacked, right? And any thoughts on that before we go to the mountain of connectivity and kind of why we're doing this?
I think that's probably the next thing to be able to discuss, because what this helps lay us down for is really this conversation about how it is that we're building into what these attacks mean. And so again, from the management perspective, being able to really figure it out means that you need to understand the threats, the impacts that are associated with it, so you can figure out then the cyber risk components. And so again, one of the conversations is really how do you then trend data? And one of the things that we're constantly talking about now is industrial use of the cloud. And that's really interesting from a perspective of before COVID. I don't think we're going to talk about we're like, oh yeah, we'll tackle that. We'll get to it when we get to it. It's no longer we'll get to it when we get to it. It is here. We've been working now across different clients that we'll walk into environments and we will see, oh wow, you've got edge connectivity. And you're connecting to a cloud for business purposes. It's actually, I just saw that comment sort of scroll by. The reason that most people put in connectivity is because they can optimize on sort of the cost allocations or the savings in their business. If you can look at a fleet of generators and you can optimize your fuel mixture by 2%, we're talking about millions of dollars. And again, coming in and saying, no, you can't do that because we're security, what that unfortunately does a lot of times is get you out of the room. They may not invite you to the next meeting. And so instead, we really have to start having a more robust conversation of, if you do that, this is how we secure it. And that is going to get really difficult and sticky with cloud. And one of the things that we'll talk about is sort of then how do you plan and proactively attack things like the cloud, where we know that people are talking about it, not only talking about it, but implementing it. And if they're implementing it without the security manager involved, that is your worst nightmare. And so how do we make sure that you're invited to the room, that you're able to provide sort of productive, constructive feedback, as it were? We'll use all the management phrases too. I don't think we'll use synergy, but we'll use a lot of good management techniques in conversations. And how do you build into then a proactive plan from there?
Right. I mean, and even that, we'll talk again as well about how to do that with the teams we have. We'll kind of go through inheriting a team, right? And if you're lucky, you get a good team, right? If you're good, they'll stick around. And your team is good, you're going to get people wanting to kind of join your team, right? I mean, that's the whole objective. And again, fortifying industrial control systems from the safety and security aspect. Now, day 2 doesn't stop there. We jump into Cyber 42, which is the industrial version of Cyber 42. So it's a security leadership simulation game we play in class that will be available on demand as well, in live, online, and obviously in person. And the whole idea here is we're going to jump in and give you things like a budget, an ICS security budget. We're going to track things like
not giving them real
culture.
budget.
No, not real money, not real money. So we're going to give you play money in a game and really focus on how you can manage that. We're going to give you real life scenarios on that and kind of pivot you through, questions and answer periods online. And you have real outcome from the scenarios and your decisions, right? So if you are,
I'd also like to offer for folks, if you haven't seen it, so we do free game days at SANS for Cyber 42, and we've done them for Industrial Edition as well. The scenarios will be different in class than those game days, but it's a really great way to sort of build yourself into what are the decisions that I need to be able to understand and work through.
Absolutely, and this is one of those examples where we just ran one of these as an example, and we're going to continue changing the scenarios for additional learning, right, for people in class and game days that we have. the actions and decision. Here's just an example. What would you do first as a manager? Focus on ICS security specific training, asset identification in the ICS, or visibility in the environment, or maybe physical security, because there is, and we've seen blended type of physical security attacks. Kicking in the doors in a substation, in the generation station, for example, and then connecting something to the network is a possibility, right? Beyond the traditional like, break in and steal something physically, right?
Yeah. Or even the people who don't do it on purpose. It's like,
yeah.
well, I didn't want to bug IT for getting a firewall rule exemption, so I just took my own network router device, just plugged it straight in, and we're good to go. I can now go on Facebook whenever I want directly from my control room.
And integrators are fun and everyone's lovely and all of this, but we also see things like things left around after an actual integration.
Yeah.
How do you manage risk if someone is in your environment that in a remote location, and then you have to understand that risk, and then if they leave things around that could compromise your environment. So a lot of things to consider. In general, ICS defense is totally doable from a management perspective and a practitioner perspective. And this course is really focusing on the management level, the step up, step over, management's in place with that responsibility of ICS security, right? So totally doable. And with that, I'll kind of pivot to little Bobby and give it back to Jason for this one.
Yeah, so this is always a little bit of a hard one, right? Because this is sort of the homage to Mike Asante, who, again, even if you never met him, is really the reason that a lot of us are in this field, and really the thought leadership that was behind where we are. And so this is one of the ones that Rob Lee had put together. I know I made the joke that ICS 5515, it's really just written by a comic book author guy. Runs a small company called Dragos on the side. Don't worry about him. But he did this great homage to Mike to really talk about passing the baton, and that's what ICS 418 feels like. The number actually comes from Mike's birthday. So we're really paying as much respect to him as we possibly can. And with that, I'd actually like to be able to bring Tim Conway. I think Tim is on the line. There's Tim.
Hey, Tim.
I am. You can hear me.
All right.
Parting thoughts.
I'm going to go try to obtain that picture Dean has behind him. I think I prefer that to my Zoom backgrounds. It's fantastic. It's a very interesting image. Hey, so I've been lurking in these. I lurked in the 515 live stream when we were launching that course, and same thing here. I don't want to take anything away from these two great instructors and authors. I'm real excited for this course. We have been talking about this class for about 7 years. Back, I worked with the utility I was with, had the opportunity of kind of being a neighboring utility to where Mike worked. And we were both in leadership roles at some point in our career, and just kind of making it through kind of the leaders lost approach of what should we be doing to handle these kind of high impact, low frequency events? How do we convince leadership to invest in kind of the OT and ICS side of the organization? How do we communicate properly when they're looking for data and there's constant data hunger to pull from these environments in ways that will enable the business, but it's certainly going to add risk and attack vectors? Those are things that Mike and I had at least each other to talk through for many, many years in our careers. When he went to NERC and we started working through with people like Jason and others in the industry on how do we do this across a sector, and how do we do it from a governance and compliance, and what does that mean to the business and the organization? This has just been decades of kind of making our way through and understanding that just like we created all the hands-on technical practitioner courses in ICS for SANS, that where we all sort of Forrest Gumped our way through our careers of just kind of being in a location and like, hey, you know about wiring and electricity. Why don't you go do some work with the INC guys in the plants? And hey, we're bringing in this new energy management system, and it's going to be all digital. And you're going to be on that project and get trained for 8-9 months on that kind of skated architecture and deployment and work in the field. And just throughout our careers, we were in the right places, right times, and had this unique upbringing in the sector. And then we did the same thing in our management careers, where we went to normal kind of what tools can I use, and you learned how to be a manager. And then you sort of, yeah, but how do you do that in critical infrastructure, and how do you do it in operations, and the differences that exist there, and where do I go for help to talk with peers and to learn? And really the same need to develop those courses that are specific to our space and our community. We have been talking about making this course since 2014. And as Jason had mentioned, there was an effort where we finally just paused everything. Some folks on our team here within SANS, myself, Doug Wiley, Ted Gutierrez, Mike Asante, all worked on kind of building a workshop. And then we sat back and watched Mike kind of deliver it from the perspective of the challenges he faced in his career and the unique stories of what he encountered and what tools and what things he found that helped him. And now, years later, to see that coming back again with people like Jason and Dean, to look at things, the emerging technology that we're all facing, these dynamic threats, understanding how to balance operations and engineering, pandemic, and all the other high impact, low frequency events. And then also and there's this management side of unique challenges on workforce and training and employee engagement and kind of planning capital assets and operating and maintenance cycles. And where do you think the regulations and governance are going to change? Capturing all that in a 2-day model where really you come in and you're going to build relationships with not just the instructors, but the people sitting to the left and right of you. It's going to be more of an ongoing fellowship kind of how do we continue to work together across sectors? What tools and resources do you leave with? Just really, really excited for this course. And I think I say this with every course we make within ICS curriculum. I wish this existed 20 years ago. That think of kind of how it would have progressed over a decade or 2 decades of different tools and refining and improvement and kind of watching as technology changes. And we used to do this way, but now we do it this way as we've adopted industrial cloud and other components that we're going to see as emerging trends. As much as I wish we had it 10, 15 years ago, I'm really, really glad we have it now. So thank you again to Dean and Jason. I know we have 2 short minutes before we have to hard stop, so I'm going to stop talking. Mike would be really proud of what's been created. You guys should have some pride in the product as well. Thank you.
Excellent, Tim. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing you guys in class, communicating with Jason and I, either online and in class, and kind of having those conversations about the main takeaways, the differences, and kind of what this really means from a broad perspective, critical infrastructure that we all rely on regularly, daily, right?
And I will say, I can't close it out any better than what Tim's words were. And what I will say though, if you are interested in this course, we provided the URL to be able to look at the new courses. You'll get an email update. We will be at Stay Sharp in January 2022. So just stay tuned. Can't wait to see people in class, on demand, online, however it is that we can help you out in your ICS security management journey. Happy to support it. So thank you very much for your time and listening to us. And I loved all the comments today.
All the best, everybody.